This is the color demonstration that I usually give in my classes, and I always apologize at the very beginning for the length of time that it's going to take. Certainly I hope you'll find it worthwhile. In order to tell you the ideas that I have about color, I find it necessary to tell you my own experience about learning color. Like all of you, when I was quite young, I discovered I had talent in drawing, and I knew at an early age that I wanted to be an artist. I made many pencil drawings when I was growing up of portraits, and I thought they came out rather well. However, I always ruined them when I tried to put color in them, because I didn't have a clue as to how one went about doing that. When I was about 18, I moved to New York in order to go to the Art Students League. And at the Art Students League, I entered the class of Robert Brackman. And in Brackman's class, I learned things I had never heard of before. I learned about values, which are the light and dark quality of colors. I learned some things about drawing. I learned about painting from dark to middle tone to light. Also some additional things about the construction of a painting. But in particular, in Brackman's class, the emphasis was on color. And Brackman told those of us who were new in class that we had to learn to see color. Now, that came as a surprise to me because I thought I already could recognize the popular colors, blue and orange and green and yellow. But Brackman was suggesting to us that we learn to see subtle nuances of color in something that seemed to be one color. Now, Brackman's approach, though he was a realistic painter, was based in color on the Impressionist approach to color, and in particular on the work of Cezanne. Now, when one sees a Cezanne painting, and here are a number of examples of Cezanne paintings. When one sees a Cezanne in a museum or in a reproduction in a book, there is much evidence of individual strokes of color in the finished painting. Cezanne did not blend his colors together, but left them very separate and very clearly noticeable. When one looks at a Cezanne from up close, you can see all those individual strokes of color in the painting. When you step to a distance, they all tend to more or less merge to make a general color. When Cezanne painted a white cloth, as is in evidence in each of these two pictures, Cezanne used everything but white. He used light blues, light purples, light grays, light greens, and one can see all those individual strokes of color in the painting. Now, when some of the old masters painted white cloth, they used white paint, and there was no question about what the color was. We don't, however, look at the Impressionists for the strong light and shade and form that the old masters had, nor does one look at the Impressionists and expect to find nor does one look at the old masters and expect to find all the subtle nuances of color that are evidenced in the Impressionist paintings. In any event, there was no instruction in how we were to see color. Brackman said, simply try to think in color, and I wasn't quite sure what that meant. And he further prophesied that simply by trying to do so, those of us who were new in class would eventually learn to see color. He further suggested that at a certain point we may see too much color, and then the problem would be how to harmonize it. Now, when I looked at the model, it all just looked like skin tone to me. I wasn't sure where to start. When Brackman would demonstrate and paint from the model, he would mix a particularly purplish kind of color and put it on his painting. And this, incidentally, is a demonstration that Brackman did. He would mix a certain purplish color of which he was fond, put it on his painting. I would look back at the model and think, how in the world did he see that as purple? But I said, well, if you really stretch it, maybe one could see that as purple. I began to do my own paintings, and I tried to make them colorful. I used colors that I saw in my paintings. I used colors that I thought I saw. And I used colors that I simply made up in an effort to make my paintings look colorful. My paintings soon looked like a rainbow. They looked like a typical Brackman student painting, and I can recognize them anywhere I see them. This, as an example, is a painting that I did in Brackman's class. I did learn to see color simply by trying to do so, but I ran into a problem. And the problem that I ran into was I kept changing my mind every day about what colors I saw. And on a given day, I would come into class while working on this painting in particular and think to myself that the color in here on the model was perhaps a little greenish, and I would paint it greenish. The next day I would come in and look at that area on the model, and think to myself, well, perhaps it wasn't greenish, maybe it was a little bit of a bluish tone. And I would mix a bluish color and change it. And the following day I would come in and look at that area and think to myself that perhaps it was grayish, not bluish, and I would change it. And the following day I would come in and look at it and think, well, maybe it really wasn't grayish, perhaps it was greenish after all, and I would change it. I was going around in circles trying to exactly identify the colors that I saw. I stayed in school for a period of approximately 2 years, and at the end of that 2-year period, I concluded that I had learned the fundamentals, and the rest I could teach myself. I then began to paint in my studio, and in my studio, I made a number of observations that made, for me, color easy.